still working through this as well.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you very much. I want to ask about fractional timeshares. Could you tell me how many cases there are in your backlog related to fractional timeshares?
So we are, I don't have here how many cases are more than 12 months old that relate to fractional timeshares.
This goes back 6 years in terms of compensation and redress. So how many of those cases are you dealing with?
Yes, okay. So over the last 3 years, we've resolved 5,600 cases in this space. You may be aware that we were subject to a judicial review, which concluded in 2023.
2023.
Yes. And following that, we've issued a further 2,500 views, which is the first stage of our process. We still have a further 1,000 views approximately to issue, which we hope we will do before the end of this financial year, i.e. in the next few weeks. Normally, only if we issue a view, again the first stage of our process, only about 20% of those views are then challenged by either party. So only 20% go through to an ombudsman decision. In this area, we've seen a higher referral rate. Parties on both sides of these disputes, have strong feelings about the rights and wrongs of the situation. So that may mean it takes us longer to fully resolve the cases, to move to the next stage and issue an ombudsman decision. But every consumer with a fractional timeshare complaint should, we hope, receive our first stage answer by the end of this financial year.
Well, that's 9,100 cases that you've referred to now. Are there any more in your backlog?
If you'd excuse me,
you must know
second.
How many people have contacted you with a case about being missold a fractional timeshare.
Yes, we have received we have. I'll come back to you with the exact details, but I know that we have resolved 5,600.
I'm going to ask you about those in a minute, but I'm asking you about your backlog, because this is a mis-selling issue, which companies were involved in selling upgrades and timeshare upgrades to people, and they were financed by banks, including Shawbrook Bank, Clydesdale Financial Services, Hitachi. You have decided that was mis-selling when with lead cases which you've resolved from that point of view. You were then subjected to judicial review because your remedy, as I understand it, was setting aside all the loan agreements for fractional timeshares, refunding all repayments that customers who bought these, were missold these things, had made to the loans they took out from these banks, and then awarding 8% per annum interest from the date of loss to the resolution of the complaint. Now that is, although it was challenged in court, it wasn't challenged successfully by the banks. So the redress is there in black and white. It's not hard to interpret, and yet you're still not getting these people their money back nearly a year after the judicial review was taken. So when are you going to get them their money back? Because this is a clear case of mis-selling. You've found that. The banks concerned, who don't want to be on the hook for repaying the money, have taken you to court and lost. When are these people who've been missold this dodgy product going to get all their money back with interest?
Well, first of all, I should say that not every case that we've received on this gets upheld by our service. We don't always find that has been followed, but we have sometimes, and indeed we took the litigation, as you mentioned, the judicial review. That was because it was our perspective as well that there is a significant number of consumer customers who have not been treated fairly and should receive their redress. I'm happy that we've been able to issue so many views in the period since the judicial review. I would like to be able to...
Nobody's got a penny back yet, have they? You've got your 2,500 views, and you hope to do another 1,000 views before the end of the financial year, but not a penny in recompense has been paid back to any of the people that were conned into buying these dodgy things.
For the views, it is very likely that they will be opposed by one of the two parties in the dispute, the respondent business or the consumer, who sometimes is professionally represented. That does mean we have to then look at each case afresh. That is delaying us in closing these cases and making sure where appropriate that the consumer receives their redress. But again, I must stress, and I'm particularly conscious that we are an impartial service, we do not always find that the consumer is entitled to redress. Where we do, I think it is in the interest of all parties that the guidance that we've already issued on the cases and the guidance that became available at the end of the judicial review is followed. But it is the right of either party.
Bother with the lead case if it doesn't resolve your caseload then?
So the lead cases have enabled us to issue the views. It is a matter of statute that if one party disagrees with the view, they can ask for an ombudsman decision. But I agree with you that delays the resolution for the consumer customer. And to be honest, irrespective of whether or not we've upheld the consumer customer, that seems a pity to me as well. We'd like to be able to provide those consumers with finality. They have been waiting a long time.
So we are now saying that the lead case doesn't really resolve anything. You have to look at all the individual cases after you've been judicially reviewed to death by the banks that don't want to give a penny back. Is that an acceptable system for redress when people have been missold a dodgy product, which everybody now recognises is dodgy, which you've issued very clear view on what your remedy should be, and it's basically not only should they get their money back, but they should get interest on the money that they've been paying back, as well as having the loans set aside.
Yeah.
Why can't this just then be dealt with? What is the point of doing a lead case if it's then got no implications whatsoever for any of the others? It's just delayed things for years.
So when we put forward a lead case and then it's judicially reviewed, more typically both parties accept the view as expressed in the judicial review and will simply take a view, or even sometimes take back the case because they think it has a limited prospect of success, or proactively settle it, for example, if it's the business. That often happens following a judicial review. For these particular consumer customers, that hasn't happened, and both parties have sought to ask us to review each case afresh using an ombudsman. Again, you are right, that does mean it will take longer for those consumer customers that are entitled to redress to get it. But that is the process as set out in FSMA that we have to follow.
How many more cases do you have to come to a view on, as you put it?
1,000.
And that's 1,000. It then? So we're only talking about 3,500 outstanding cases.
I will just double check.
Will you write to us?
And write
because
to us,
we would like to have the actual amounts. Now, why has not a single case since the High Court, why has not a single customer missold these dodgy timeshares had a penny of their money back?
I can't comment on the redress that gets paid to the customers. What I can comment on is the state of the cases that we hold with our service, and it's really the same picture that I've described previously, which is we have a certain number which we have fully resolved. That's the 5,600 I said originally. Then there is a further tranche that we have completed our first stage with some more to work through, and then again, dependent on the parties, we may need to write decisions on each of those cases as well.
And how long
that
will
really
that
sets
take?
out our time frames.
If, for example, you said that 20% are usually challenged, but your implication in your answer to me was a lot higher percentage of these are going to be challenged, if not all.
Yes, 70% is the current
70%.
referral rate. Yes.
why is the challenge rate so much higher in this instance than it is in other instances when you've had lead cases and come to a conclusion and suggested a remedy?
Because both parties in the case, both the respondent businesses and the consumers, again sometimes with the support of professional representatives, have chosen to ask for that second stage in higher numbers, and I think that just reflects the strength of feeling and the complexity of some of the arguments advanced as well. Again, it is their right to do that.
If you've got a lead case and you've got a remedy,
yes.
Why is that complex then? Because people have been sold these dodgy things. They've taken out loans with the banks I mentioned. Mm-hmm. The banks don't want to give the money back, but you've decided that they should. Why does every single case have to be relitigated again? And
the position of the Financial Ombudsman Service is very much that a judicial review clarified our position, and again in other similar situations where a judicial review has been successfully defended by the Financial Ombudsman Service, we have seen businesses or consumers choosing not to take matters further forward but abide by the decision. But that's simply not the case here, and we are bound by our process, which is to offer that second stage.
So there's an incentive for the banks that lost the judicial review to carry on arguing?
It would, as I say, it would elongate the process from the consumer's perspective. But again, it is not
these
solely...
timeshares often bought by quite elderly people. Are they hoping they're just going to die in the meantime?
I couldn't comment on the bank's motives, but I would also say for fairness and balance that the claims management companies or professional reps are also referring cases to the Ombudsman decision, which again, for both sides, is their right. They're entitled to do that. However, we do remind all parties, professional representatives, but also respondent businesses, that we're in a situation where all businesses should be looking very carefully at our findings, because they're obligated to do that and take it into account. So we do remind them of that. But ultimately, if they're requesting the next stage review, it's something that we do have to do. And
there ought to be disincentives by increasing the interest rate the longer it takes. Do you have any deadline for dealing with these cases?
The same service standard applies to these cases as any other. Clearly, it has taken us much longer to resolve these cases than either we would like or is typical of the service. And that, I think, is a real shame. I sympathise with the position that the consumers are in here. Our key objective is to try and resolve as many of those outstanding cases as we can, but with quality.
After the initial stage has been taken, what are the next stages before compensation and redress?
It would be, if required by one or other party, it would be an ombudsman decision, and then that decision is legally binding. It can be rejected by the consumer. They could, if they wish, go back to court. But really, the key stage here is to either have a view that is accepted by both parties, which could be a matter of weeks for many of these customers that are outstanding, or have a decision which would normally take, just to give a sense of it, probably a further 3 months.
That's 3 months to work through the first one of the views, but how long will it take to work through 3,500?
We progress them in parallel. We don't do them sequentially. So
as soon as the first one is resolved, the rest are resolved. That's not how you do it. You've just told me each one has to be looked at individually.
We would work on many cases in parallel, but once the view has been issued, as soon as the consumer or business asks us to refresh it for an ombudsman review, it would then go to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman would then review it, and we would have multiple ombudsmen working on these cases.
If the new FCA consumer duty had been in place when these fractional timeshare things were missold, would it have made any difference?
I think the consumer duty really points to the need to think about foreseeable harm, and these are very, very long-term products in their nature. So I think there would have been an emphasis on the business that sold them, making sure that, one, you know, if the consumer's life circumstances changed, that was the implications of that were made very clear to the consumer. It would have made it would have had the requirement on the business that's selling the product to really explain exactly what is entailed in that purchase, what the terms and conditions were, and so on. I think it could only have helped, but I do go back to an answer I gave earlier, which is the Financial Ombudsman Service has always held businesses to a standard that is not the law and not even regulation, but a fair and reasonable treatment of customers, taking into account both the existing law and regulation at the time.
Hey, and just for the record, in terms of the complaint on your website, the three main providers of this finance were Shawbrook Bank, Clydesdale Financial Services trading as Barclays Partner Finance, and Navuna, previously known as Hitachi Capital. So I'm just reading that into the record. Keir.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd like to ask you some questions about the independent assessor